The judge didn't look at me when he said my name. "Mrs. Hale," he said, already reaching for his pen. "Not Ms.?" Not Julia. Just the title I'd spent 12 years earning and was now being stripped of in under 10 minutes. "Yes, Your Honor," I said. My voice echoed more than it should have. The courtroom was full, but it felt hollow. Richard's legal team sat in a clean, confident row. Dark suits, open folders, quiet smiles. They had the posture of people who already knew how this would end. Richard didn't turn around. He sat straight, relaxed, one arm draped over the back of his chair like the room belonged to him. Maybe it did. He'd funded half the city. He'd donated to 3 judges' campaigns. He'd shaken hands with people who made laws instead of following them. I stood alone. My attorney leaned toward me and whispered, "Keep your answers short. Don't volunteer anything." I nodded. I had learned silence long before this room. The judge cleared his throat. "We're here to finalize the dissolution of marriage and rule on asset distribution. Counsel for the petitioner, you may proceed." Richard's lawyer stood immediately. "Thank you, Your Honor. This is a straightforward case. My client entered the marriage with substantial independent assets. Mrs. Hale did not." I felt the first sting then, not because it wasn't true, but because of how easily it was said. "Throughout the marriage," the lawyer continued, "Mr. Hale maintained full financial responsibility. Mrs. Hale was supported entirely." I opened my mouth. My lawyer touched my wrist, a warning. The judge nodded along, eyes scanning documents already prepared. "Mrs. Hale, do you dispute this characterization?" "Yes," I said. One word: calm, controlled. The judge finally looked up. "On what grounds?" I inhaled slowly. "On the grounds that it is inaccurate." A few quiet chuckles rippled behind me. I didn't turn around. Richard shifted slightly. That was the first thing he'd done since I walked in. His lawyer smiled politely. "Your Honor, we have bank statements, trust records, and corporate filings that clearly—" "I'd like to answer," I said. The judge hesitated. Briefly. "Of course," I said. "I only want to clarify dates." The lawyer frowned. "Dates aren't in dispute." "They are to me," I said softly. The judge sighed. "Go on." "I'd like to know," I said, looking directly at Richard for the first time, "which date you're using as the start of our financial separation." Richard didn't answer. His lawyer did. "March 14th last year," I nodded. "That's interesting." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "Because on March 16th, I said, "I was still listed as an authorized signer on 3 of those accounts." The courtroom stilled. "That's irrelevant," the lawyer snapped. "Authorization doesn't equal ownership." "No," I said, "but revocation requires notice." Richard finally turned around. Not angry, not scared, curious. The judge leaned back. "Mrs. Hale, are you suggesting documentation was altered?" "I'm suggesting," I said carefully, "that some records assume actions happened before they legally could." Silence. My lawyer stared at me, like he was seeing me for the first time. The judge looked down at the file again, slower this time. "Clerk," he said, "pull the original submission timestamps." The clerk hesitated. Just for a second. Richard's jaw tightened. I lowered my eyes, folded my hands, and waited. No one noticed my hands were shaking, except me. Because they thought the verdict was already written. They didn't know I'd memorized every line. Richard used to say, "You don't need to worry about money. I've got it handled." At first, it sounded like care. In court, it sounded like ownership. Mrs. Hale, the judge said, pulling me back. You may continue, but stay relevant. I will, I said. That's all I've ever done. A few people shifted. The judge didn't react, but his pen paused. Richard's lawyer stood again. Your Honor, if we're done speculating, I'd like to remind the court that Mrs. Hale hasn't worked in over a decade. She benefited from my client's success without contributing to it? I smiled faintly. Not because it was funny, because it was familiar. Richard leaned toward his lawyer and whispered something. I knew that posture. He used it at dinners, at charity events, at home. Handle it, quietly. The judge looked at me. You wish to respond? Yes, I said, but not to that. The judge frowned. Then to what? To the idea that I didn't contribute. The lawyer scoffed. Your Honor, let her speak, the judge said. I nodded my thanks and turned slightly, not toward Richard, but toward the empty jury box. It helped me breathe. When we married, I said, Richard already had money. That's true. What he didn't have was stability. That's irrelevant, his lawyer said quickly. It isn't, I replied. It explains why my name disappeared before my voice did. Richard laughed once. Sharp. This is ridiculous. The judge looked at him. Mr. Hale, you'll refrain from commentary. Richard raised his hands. Of course, I continued. At first I signed everything. Checks, forms, trusts. Richard liked efficiency. He said it made him feel safe. Richard's lawyer crossed his arms. And then one day, I said, I stopped seeing my name. The judge looked up. Explain. I'd ask, I said. I'd say, why isn't my name here? And Richard would say, she didn't understand complex finances. Richard cut in. I turned to him. No, you said, it's temporary. The room went quiet. Richard smiled thinly. Because it was. Was it? I asked. My lawyer shifted beside me. Julia, I remember the night, I said. I asked you why the account changed. You were on your phone. You didn't look up. You said, don't make this harder than it needs to be. Richard shrugged. I was under pressure. So was I said. I just didn't bill anyone for it. The judge cleared his throat. Mrs. Hale, what are you alleging? I'm not alleging, I said. I'm explaining. The lawyer snapped. Explaining what? That you trusted your husband? Yes, I said. And that trust was used to erase me. Richard stood. This is emotional manipulation. The judge raised his voice. Sit down, Mr. Hale. Richard didn't, at least not immediately. His jaw worked, then he sat slowly, eyes never leaving mine. I felt the old instinct rise, the urge to soften, to apologize, to make it easier. I ignored it. When I stopped arguing, I said, it wasn't because I agreed. It was because I started paying attention. To what? The judge asked. To patterns, I said. To timing. To how decisions were always framed as done deals. The lawyer laughed. So this is about feelings now? No, I said. It's about consent. The judge stilled. Go on. I was told things were finalized before I saw them, I said. Signed before I was asked. Moved before I was informed. Richard leaned forward. You could have left. I didn't want to leave, I said. I wanted to understand. And you didn't, he said coldly. I met his eyes. I did. The clerk coughed. The judge shifted. My lawyer whispered, You're doing better than you think. I hadn't expected that. I didn't raise my voice, I said. I didn't accuse. I watched. I kept copies. The lawyer froze. Copies of what? I smiled. Just a little. Of conversations you assumed I forgot. The judge leaned forward. Mrs. Hale, are you saying you have documentation relevant to asset control? Yes, I said, but not yet. Richard scoffed. You're bluffing. I shook my head. I'm patient. The judge stared at me for a long moment. Then he said, proceed carefully. I always do, I said, because the day I stopped fighting wasn't the day I lost. It was the day I started preparing. Mrs. Hale, Richard's lawyer said, turning toward the judge with a practiced sigh. This is drifting into personal grievance. It's context, I said. It's theater, he corrected, and frankly, it's embarrassing. A few people laughed, not loudly, the polite kind, the kind meant to remind you where you stand. I felt my face warm, but I kept my expression neutral. I'd learned that skill early in my marriage, how to feel something without letting it escape. The judge looked at me. Mrs. Hale, please, stay focused on facts. I am, I said. I just haven't reached the part you're expecting yet. Richard leaned back, crossing his arms. She likes suspense, he said lightly. His lawyer chuckled. She always did. I nodded once. Yes? I listened. The lawyer raised an eyebrow. Listen to what? To how you talk about me, I said. Even now. The judge tapped his pen. Proceed. Richard's lawyer walked a few steps closer, his tone softening into something almost kind. Mrs. Hale, isn't it true that you often felt overwhelmed by financial discussions? No, I said. Isn't it true, he continued, that you asked your husband to handle things because it stressed you out? I asked him to explain them, I said. He chose to handle them. That sounds like the same thing, he said. It isn't, I replied. He smiled. You didn't review statements, did you? I did. You didn't question transfers, did you? I did. You didn't object until now, did you? I paused, just long enough. No, I said. There it was, the opening they wanted. Richard's lawyer turned to the judge. Your Honor, this is exactly my point. Silence implies consent. I nodded slowly. Only if silence is empty. The judge looked up. Explain. I was quiet, I said, because every time I spoke, I was told it was handled, so I listened instead. Richard laughed under his breath. You're twisting things. Am I? I asked. His lawyer pressed on. Mrs. Hale, did you have any formal training in finance or law? No. So you admit you weren't qualified to assess complex asset structures? I admit, I said, that I asked questions until the answers repeated. The lawyer frowned. Repeated? Yes, I said. That's when people stop thinking. A murmur rippled through the room. The judge raised a hand. Enough commentary. Ask your next question. Richard's lawyer inhaled sharply. Mrs. Hale, do you recall signing a postnuptial agreement? Yes. Do you recall the date? Yes. Do you recall waiving future claims? Yes. Then what exactly are we doing here? He asked, spreading his hands. I looked at the document on the table, then at the judge, then back at the lawyer. Waiting, I said. For what? The judge asked. For you to notice, I replied. The judge stiffened. Notice what? That the agreement was signed at 9:12 a.m., I said calmly. But the notary stamp says 8:47. Silence slammed into the room. That's impossible, the lawyer said quickly. Clerical error. Maybe, I said. Or maybe someone was in a hurry. Richard leaned forward. You're reaching. I met his eyes. You taught me how. The judge looked at the document again, slower. Counsel? We can explain that, the lawyer said. It's irrelevant. Is it? The judge asked. The lawyer hesitated. Just a fraction, I noticed. Richard noticed that I noticed. His confidence flickered. Not gone, but thinner. The judge cleared his throat. Mrs. Hale, do you have more discrepancies like this? Yes, I said. And you chose not to present them earlier? The judge asked. I wanted to be sure, I said, that no one could say I misunderstood. Richard scoffed. You're enjoying this? I shook my head. I'm enduring it. The judge studied me. Why now? I swallowed. Because this is the first time I'm being allowed to finish a sentence. No one laughed this time. The judge leaned back. Proceed. Richard's lawyer tried to recover. Your Honor, even if there were minor inconsistencies, they aren't minor, I said softly. They repeat. The judge's pen stopped moving. I felt it then, the shift. Not dramatic, not loud, but real. They still thought I was weak. They just weren't sure anymore. And that uncertainty was enough, because humiliation only works when you rush to escape it. I didn't. I stayed. I listened. I memorized. And I waited for the moment when silence stopped meaning submission and started meaning strategy. The judge didn't speak right away. He reread the page, then flipped it over, then back again, like the paper might confess if he stared long enough. Counsel, he said at last, approach. Richard's lawyer stood so fast his chair scraped the floor. I stayed where I was. No one invited me. They never did. The whispers started behind me, low, urgent, excited. I focused on the grain of the wooden railing in front of me. The pattern repeated every few inches. I counted them. It helped me breathe. My lawyer leaned close. You didn't tell me about the timestamp. I didn't know you'd listen, I whispered back. He exhaled slowly. I'm listening now. At the bench, Richard's lawyer gestured sharply, his voice tight. I couldn't hear the words, but I recognized the rhythm. Deflect, minimize, reframe. Richard stood just behind him, arms crossed, jaw set. He looked annoyed more than worried. That bothered me more than anger would have. The judge raised a hand, cutting the discussion short. Mrs. Hale, he said, looking directly at me now. You stated you kept copies. Yes, Your Honor. What kind of copies? He asked. I stepped forward. My legs felt steadier than they had all morning. Emails, statements, drafts, versions that were sent to me before they were finalized. Richard laughed once, too loud. You kept old emails? That's your big reveal? I didn't look at him. Not old. Original. The judge frowned. Explain the distinction. Final versions, I said, are clean. Originals still have fingerprints. The courtroom went very quiet. Richard's lawyer objected. Your Honor, this is speculation, dressed up as metaphor. Overruled, the judge said. I understand the point. Richard's smile faltered. The judge turned back to me. When did you begin keeping these records? I thought for a moment. After the third time, I was told a document didn't exist. Richard snapped. That never happened. I looked at him. You said it was a draft. His lawyer jumped in. Drafts are not binding. No, I said, but they show intent. The judge nodded slightly. Go on. I didn't download everything, I said. I didn't need to. Just enough to establish a pattern. What pattern? The judge asked. That changes happened after my access was removed, I said. But we're backdated to look like they happened before. Richard shook his head. This is absurd. Is it? I asked quietly. Then why did the timestamps stop lining up? His lawyer cut in fast. Because systems migrate, time zones shift, errors occur. Yes, I said. Once, maybe twice. I reached into my folder. Richard straightened. For the first time, I saw it. Real tension. his hand clenched around the back of his chair. The judge held up a hand. One document. Mrs. Hale. I slid a single page forward. This is an email from Richard to the family lawyer, I said, sent at 11:43 p.m. on April 2nd. The lawyer frowned. And it references an account transfer dated April 1st, I said. But the bank confirmation wasn't issued until April 4th. The judge's eyes narrowed. That suggests that the decision existed before the mechanism, I finished. Which means the date is cosmetic. Richard leaned forward. You're twisting coincidences. I met his eyes. You always said details didn't matter. The judge turned to Richard. Did you say that, Mr. Hale? Richard opened his mouth, closed it. In context. The judge didn't like that answer. Mrs. Hale, he said, how many such discrepancies do you have? I hesitated, not because I didn't know, but because timing mattered. Enough, I said. Richard laughed again, brittle this time. Enough to what? Confuse people? Enough, I repeated, to show this wasn't an accident. The judge sat back. Counsel, he said to Richard's lawyer, I'm going to need a clear explanation for these inconsistencies. We can provide one, the lawyer said quickly. Today, the judge said. The lawyer swallowed. We may need time. The judge nodded slowly. Granted, court will recess for 30 minutes. The gavel struck. The sound echoed longer than it should have. As people stood, Richard finally turned fully toward me. His voice was low, controlled, meant only for me. You think you're clever, he said, but you don't know what you're doing. I looked at him, really looked. I know exactly what I'm doing. I said, you just forgot I was watching. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he smiled. That smile used to scare me. Now it told me everything. Because men like Richard don't smile when they're winning. They smile when they're trying to remember how. When court resumed, the room felt different. Not louder. Not tense in the obvious way. Just alert. Like everyone had leaned forward without realizing it. The judge entered without ceremony and took his seat. He didn't shuffle papers this time. He didn't sigh. He looked directly at me. Mrs. Hale, he said, you may continue. Just that. Not briefly. Not within reason, just continue. Richard's lawyer stood. Your Honor. The judge raised a hand. You'll have your turn. Richard shifted beside him. His knee bounced once, then stopped when he noticed me watching. I stepped forward again. My lawyer didn't stop me this time. I want to be clear, I said. I'm not here to accuse anyone of criminal intent. Richard's lawyer smiled, relieved. Thank you. I'm here, I continued, to correct the record. The smile faded. The judge nodded. Proceed. I held up another document. This is a trust amendment. The final version lists April 10th as the effective date. Yes, the lawyer said, as previously stated. I turned to the judge. May I read one sentence from the draft version? The lawyer objected. Drafts are inadmissible. The judge looked at him. You've said that. Overruled. I read slowly. Pending Julia's consent, assets will be reallocated upon execution. Richard inhaled sharply. I lowered the page. That sentence doesn't appear in the final version. The judge leaned forward. Why not? I didn't answer. I looked at Richard. He met my gaze, and then looked away. The judge noticed. Mr. Hale, he said, care to explain? Richard cleared his throat. It was redundant. Redundant to whom? The judge asked. To me, Richard said. The assets were mine. The judge's expression hardened. That's not what the sentence says. Richard's lawyer jumped in. Your Honor, trust language is often simplified in final drafts. By removing consent? The judge asked. The lawyer hesitated. In effect? In effect, the judge cut in. Or in appearance? Silence. I felt something loosen in my chest. Not relief, recognition. The judge turned back to me. Mrs. Hale, how did you obtain these drafts? I was copied, I said, until I wasn't. When did that change? He asked. 3 days after I asked why my name was missing, I said. Richard scoffed. Coincidence. The judge didn't respond to him. He addressed me instead. What did you do then? I asked again, I said. And then I stopped asking. And started collecting, the judge said. Yes. Richard leaned forward. You're making me sound like a villain. I met his eyes. You're doing that yourself. The judge struck the gavel once. Enough. Richard leaned back, jaw tight. The judge looked down at the documents again. Counsel, he said to Richard's lawyer, you assured this court the financial separation was clean. It was, the lawyer insisted. Legally. The judge looked up. Legality isn't the only standard here. That sentence landed harder than any gavel. The lawyer swallowed. Your Honor, I'm not finished, the judge said. He turned to me. Mrs. Hale, why didn't you challenge these changes when they occurred? I answered honestly. Because every time I tried, I was told it was done, that there was nothing to discuss. The judge nodded slowly. And you believe that? No, I said. I accepted that arguing wouldn't help. So you waited, he said. Yes. Richard laughed bitterly. So this is revenge. I shook my head. This is correction. The judge watched me closely. What outcome are you seeking, Mrs. Hale? I didn't answer right away. The old version of me would have rushed, would have softened the truth to sound reasonable. I want the court, I said carefully, to see what I was asked not to see. The judge considered that. Then he turned to Richard. Mr. Hale, did you ever inform your wife that her consent was removed from trust amendments? Richard hesitated. Just long enough. No, he said, because it wasn't required. The judge's eyes narrowed. According to whom? Richard opened his mouth. His lawyer spoke instead. According to standard practice. The judge leaned back, folding his hands. Standard practice doesn't excuse selective transparency. The room held its breath. For the first time, the judge continued, I'm concerned this court was presented with conclusions rather than facts. Richard's confidence cracked. Not shattered, just fractured. I felt it. So did he. The judge looked at me one last time. Mrs. Hale, you've been very patient. Yes, I said. That patience, he said, may have changed the direction of this case. I nodded once, because power doesn't vanish in a single moment. It leaks, slowly, quietly, until everyone can see where it's gone. Once the judge questioned intent, everything else loosened. Not fell apart, loosened. Like a knot pulled too many times in the same direction. Mrs. Hale, the judge said, you've suggested this wasn't a single decision, that others were involved. Yes, I said, because no one does this alone. Richard's lawyer stood. Your Honor, this is bordering on conspiracy. I looked at him. Only if everyone lies. The judge nodded once. Proceed. I turned slightly, letting my gaze move across the room. I didn't just keep documents, I said. I kept conversations. Richard sighed loudly. You're exaggerating. Am I? I asked. Then tell the court who suggested removing me from correspondence. The lawyer objected. Relevance. Overruled, the judge said. Answer the question. Richard didn't. He looked at his lawyer instead. The judge noticed. Mr. Hale? Richard clenched his jaw. My legal team advised streamlining communication. After what event? The judge asked. Richard hesitated. After disagreements. Define disagreement, the judge said. I answered for him. After I asked for explanations in writing. The fixer cleared his throat. No one had noticed him much before. Middle-aged, forgettable, always sitting just behind Richard's lawyer. He'd introduced himself earlier as a consultant. I turned toward him. You were CC'd on the first draft, weren't you? He stiffened. I don't recall. You forwarded it, I said, with a note that said, we'll clean this up before she sees it. The room stirred. That's an assumption, Richard snapped. No, I said. It's a quote. The fixer's face drained of color. The judge leaned forward. Mrs. Hale, do you have that message? Yes, I said. But I don't need it yet. Richard slammed his palm against the table. This is outrageous. The judge struck the gavel. Sit down. Richard did, but his control was gone now. He looked smaller when he wasn't directing the room. I continued. After that email, I was removed from shared access. After that, documents began appearing already finalized. The judge turned to the fixer. Is that accurate? The fixer swallowed. I was following instructions. From whom? The judge asked. The fixer glanced at Richard. Just for a second. That was enough. The judge's voice sharpened. Answer the question. From counsel, the fixer said quickly. Richard's lawyer shook his head. That's not true. I tilted my head. You told him it was cleaner that way. The lawyer stiffened. You don't have proof. I have timestamps, I said, and forwarding chains. The judge exhaled slowly. This is no longer a matter of interpretation. Richard leaned forward, eyes blazing. You're trying to ruin me. I looked at him. You ruined yourself. I just stopped protecting you. That landed. The judge turned to Richard. Why did you believe your wife wouldn't notice these changes? Richard laughed bitterly. Because she never said anything. The judge's gaze hardened. Silence is not consent. I felt something tighten behind my eyes. I blinked it back. The judge continued. It's restraint. Richard stared at the bench, stunned. I spoke again. Every person involved assumed I'd react emotionally. Argue, threaten, leave. The fixer shifted uncomfortably. But I didn't, I said. I waited. I let the story finish writing itself. Richard's lawyer tried one last time. Your Honor, even if mistakes were made, there's no evidence of malicious intent. I shook my head. There is. It's just subtle. The judge looked at me. Explain. Every decision benefited one person, I said, and every omission harmed the same one. The judge nodded. Patterns matter. Richard's shoulders sagged slightly. He looked tired now, old. The judge addressed the room. This court will not tolerate coordinated obfuscation. The word echoed. Richard whispered, You could have ended this quietly. I leaned toward him. So could you. The judge turned to me. Mrs. Hale, you could present everything now. Yes, I said. Why don't you? He asked. I paused. My heart thudded once. Hard. Because, I said, I want everyone to understand it wasn't one bad document. Richard scoffed weakly. You're enjoying this. I shook my head. I'm choosing the longer road. The judge studied me, then nodded. Very well. He turned to Richard's lawyer. You'll provide full disclosure of all drafts. correspondence, and advisory communications within 48 hours. The lawyer's face went pale. That's non-negotiable, the judge said. Richard closed his eyes. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked unsure of the outcome. Not panicked, not broken, just unsure. And that was everything. Because when power stops being certain, it starts unraveling. The next morning, Richard arrived early. I knew because he was already standing when I walked in. Phone pressed to his ear, voice low and urgent. "No," he said, "that's not acceptable." He noticed me watching and turned away, lowering his voice even further. When he hung up, he didn't sit. He stayed standing, pacing once, then twice, like movement might give him leverage. His lawyer arrived a moment later, face tight, tie crooked. "We need to talk," the lawyer said under his breath. Richard shook his head. "Not here." The judge entered before either of them could move. "Be seated," the bailiff said. Richard sat, but not comfortably. His confidence didn't fill the room anymore. It leaked out in small, sharp motions, tapping fingers, clenched jaw, eyes darting to the doors, as if someone important might still arrive and save him. The judge looked displeased. "Counsel," he said, "you were ordered to produce records." "Yes, Your Honor," the lawyer said quickly. "We complied." "Did you?" the judge asked. The lawyer hesitated. "Within reason." The judge's eyes narrowed. "That wasn't the instruction." I felt it then, the shift. The room was no longer leaning toward Richard. It was watching him. The judge turned to me. "Mrs. Hale, you've reviewed the disclosures?" "Yes." "And?" he asked. "They're incomplete," I said. Richard laughed, high and sharp. "Of course they are. Nothing's ever enough for you." The judge struck the gavel. "Mr. Hale." Richard stopped, too abruptly. I continued. "Several drafts are missing. Entire email chains end mid-sentence." The judge looked at the lawyer. "Explanation?" The lawyer cleared his throat. "Those communications were internal strategy." I shook my head. "They were decisions." Richard leaned forward. "You're splitting hairs." "No," I said. "I'm counting them." A murmur spread through the room. The judge held up a hand. "Mrs. Hale," he said, "is there something specific you'd like the court to see?" "Yes," I said, "but I need one answer first." The judge nodded. "Ask." I turned to Richard. "Did you ever instruct anyone to keep information from me because you believed I'd interfere?" Richard stared at me. "That's absurd." The judge didn't look away from him. "Answer the question." Richard exhaled hard. "I didn't want unnecessary conflict." I tilted my head. "So that's a yes." "No," he snapped. "That's not what I said." "It is," the judge said calmly. "In effect." Richard stood. "This is a setup." "Sit down," the judge ordered. Richard didn't move. The bailiff stepped forward. "Sir." Richard looked around. Really looked. At the judge, at the bailiff, at the people who used to nod at him in boardrooms and charity galas. No one nodded now. He sat. I reached into my folder. "This is the missing chain." Richard's lawyer surged to his feet. "Objection!" The judge didn't even look at him. "Denied." I read aloud. "Not everything, just enough. She doesn't need to know. She'll slow it down. Once it's finalized, she won't have standing. Handle it quietly." Richard closed his eyes. The fixer shifted in his seat, pale. The judge's voice was cold. "Mr. Hale, is this your language?" Richard didn't answer. "Is it?" the judge repeated. "Yes," Richard said finally. "But it's being taken out of context." The judge nodded. "Context is precisely the issue." Richard laughed once, bitter. "You think this changes anything?" The judge leaned forward. It changes everything. Richard turned to me then, not angry, not smug, desperate. "You're burning the house down," he said quietly. I met his eyes. "You locked me in it." The judge addressed the room. "This court will not reward deliberate exclusion designed to eliminate consent." Richard's lawyer whispered urgently to him. Richard waved him off. "I built this," Richard said suddenly. "I earned it." "No," I said. "You controlled it." The judge nodded. "There's a difference." Richard slumped back in his chair. For the first time, I saw him not as powerful, but as exposed. The judge looked at me. "Mrs. Hale, do you wish to proceed with full presentation now?" I nodded. "Yes," Richard whispered. "Please." It was barely audible. I might have imagined it, if his eyes hadn't finally met mine without calculation. But it was too late. Because reputation can protect you from rumors. It can't protect you from records. And in that moment, everyone in the room understood something Richard never had. Power only works while people believe in it. And belief had just left the building. The ruling didn't come with drama. No raised voices, no gasps, no cinematic pause. Just the sound of paper turning, and a judge who had already decided what integrity required. "I've reviewed the disclosures," the judge said, voice even. "And the supplemental materials presented today?" Richard sat very still. His lawyer no longer whispered. The fixer stared straight ahead, like movement might draw attention. The judge continued, "This court finds that Mrs. Hale was systematically excluded from financial decisions that materially affected her legal standing." Richard exhaled sharply. "Your Honor," the judge raised a hand. "I'm not finished." I felt my heartbeat slow. Not relief, focus. "The pattern," the judge said, "is not accidental. It reflects intent to circumvent informed consent." Richard laughed weakly. "That's a strong word." "It's an accurate one," the judge replied. He looked down again. "Accordingly, this court orders the restoration of assets transferred under incomplete disclosure." Richard turned toward his lawyer. "You said this wouldn't happen." The lawyer didn't answer. I stayed quiet. I'd learned better than to interrupt the truth while it was speaking. The judge went on. "Trust amendments executed without spousal acknowledgement are hereby voided." Richard's shoulders sagged. "Additionally," the judge said, "the court recognizes Mrs. Hale's non-monetary contributions as legally substantive." I swallowed. That sentence mattered more than the numbers. The judge finally looked at me. "Mrs. Hale, please understand, this is not punitive." "I understand," I said. "This is corrective," he said. "Yes," I repeated. "That's all I asked for." Richard shook his head slowly. "You planned this." I looked at him. "I prepared for it." The judge cleared his throat. "Mrs. Hale will retain joint interest in the Hale Family Trust, as originally outlined prior to amendment." The words landed quietly, but they changed everything. Richard stared at the bench. "You're taking half." "No," I said softly. "I'm taking back." The judge nodded once. "There's a difference." The clerk began typing. Keys clicked steadily, indifferent to legacy. Richard leaned towards me. "You could have taken more." I looked at him. "I didn't want more." He frowned. "Why not?" "Because then this would be about punishment," I said. "And it isn't." The judge addressed Richard directly. "This ruling does not strip you of status or livelihood." Richard laughed bitterly. "It strips me of control." The judge didn't disagree. As the final orders were read, I felt something unexpected, an emptiness where anger used to live. I had imagined this moment differently once. Louder, sharper, vindictive. Instead, it was clean. The judge concluded, "Court is adjourned." The gavel fell. No applause, no reaction, just people standing, chairs scraping, the machinery of consequence moving on. Richard stood slowly. "So, that's it?" "Yes," I said. He studied me. "Was it worth it?" I thought of the nights I'd stayed quiet, the mornings I'd reread emails, the years I'd been underestimated because I didn't shout. "Yes," I said, "because I can leave knowing I wasn't erased." He nodded once. Not in agreement, in understanding. As we walked toward the exit, he spoke again. "They'll say you won." I stopped and looked at him. "No," I said, "they'll say I survived." He watched me go. I didn't look back, because I hadn't taken everything, only what was mine. The hallway outside the courtroom smelled like old paper and disinfectant. People passed me without looking, lawyers already on their phones, assistants whispering schedules, strangers who had watched my life rearrange itself and were now late for lunch. I stood there for a moment, holding my folder, like it still mattered. Then I let my arm drop. My lawyer cleared his throat. "You were remarkable in there." I looked at him. "You didn't believe me at first." He smiled, tired. "I do now." "That's enough," I said. He hesitated. "If you ever need—" "I won't," I said gently. "But thank you." He nodded and walked away. I was alone again, but this time it felt different. "Julia." I turned. Richard stood a few steps behind me. No entourage, no phone, just him. "I won't keep you," he said quickly. I waited. "They'll talk," he said. "You know that." "Yes." "They'll say things about motive, about timing." "Yes." He swallowed. "You could have destroyed me." I shook my head. "I didn't want to destroy you." "Why?" he asked. His voice cracked on the word, because for the first time, he wasn't asking to control the answer. "Because then, I'd still be reacting to you," I said. "And I'm done doing that." He nodded slowly. "I really thought you didn't understand." I met his eyes. I understood everything. I just didn't announce it. Silence stretched between us. Not hostile, not warm, just honest. "I'm sorry," he said finally. I believed he meant it. I also knew it didn't change anything. "I know," I said, "but that apology belongs to an earlier version of me." He flinched. "And now?" "Now," I said, "I'm going home." He stepped aside. Outside, the sky was pale and wide, the kind of gray that didn't threaten rain, just distance. I stood on the courthouse steps and breathed in air that wasn't recycled or filtered or conditioned for power. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You were very calm today." I smiled, deleted it. Another message, this one from my sister. "Proud of you." I typed back, "I'm okay." And I was. Not triumphant, not euphoric. Whole. I walked to my car, alone. No cameras, no audience, just the sound of my shoes on concrete and the steady rhythm of a life moving forward again. As I reached for the door handle, I paused. For years, I had been quiet because I thought it was safer. Today I understood the truth. I had been quiet because I was listening. And when I finally spoke, it wasn't to shout. It was to correct the record. They underestimated me in court, dressed simply, standing alone, treated like I didn't belong. They thought the verdict was already decided. They were wrong, because the quietest person in the room isn't always powerless. Sometimes, she's the only one who knows exactly when to speak. And when she does, everything changes.